from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome back to our third and final program that's coming to you from the good cooperation of Lewis Clark State College in Lewiston, Idaho. This is the 12th annual International Exchange Conference by that institution, and for a number of years now, the staff and administration at Lewis Clark State College has cooperated to allow us to have their distinguished guests on the North Idaho College Public Forum. On the third and final program, we're going to talk about cooperative opportunities in higher education between Mexico and the United States, and we have two guests that are highly qualified to address this subject. First of all, I welcome to the program Dr. Fernando Niochiki, who is the co-director of the USMexico Project on Higher Education, the Economic Development and Institutional Change. He is also the former assistant provost and advisor to the president of Stanford University. We have also, as our second guest, Dr. Richard Johnson, who is at this time the executive director of the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. We're delighted to have you, and I know you have a very busy schedule, but you're very cooperative and thoughtful to take this time to be with us on our program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Buenas tardes.
I would also like to point out to our viewers that we have our guest in Lewiston, and Janelle Burke, our regular panelist, and I are in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, so we have a uplink and downlink to bring this program together. It's an exciting technological advancement that we've been experiencing in recent years. At this time, I would ask Janelle Burke to commence the questioning.
Dick, I'd like to begin with you. Can you tell us what is WISHE and what are some of the purposes of that program?
I'd love to do that, Janelle. WISHE, the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, was established by Idaho and 12 other western states, essentially the whole western region of the United States, in the early 50s to develop and facilitate and operate cooperative agreements among the states to strengthen higher education opportunities that were available to their citizens. Many of the western states, Idaho included, but Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, are less populous states and therefore find it difficult to afford comprehensive resources in higher education, especially in very expensive programs such as medical schools or dental schools or vet schools. WISHE makes it unnecessary for each state to develop some of those resources by helping Idaho or Montana send students interested in studying veterinary medicine or dentistry to other schools in the region that have those programs. Idaho appropriates money to support those students, and they are, for tuition purposes, they are treated as in-state students where they attend school. That is called our Professional Student Exchange Program. We have several other mechanisms that operate, one at the graduate level and one at the undergraduate level, have a little bit different wrinkles to them, but essentially are all meant to provide opportunities for students from one state to move to another for access to educational resources without paying the full cost of attending as a non-resident student, which is going up and up and up in our western states. Some states are charging $5,000 to $10,000 per year as a non-resident tuition. So students who pay either resident tuition or, in the case of undergraduate students getting these benefits, pay 150% of resident tuition, which is in all cases much less expensive than attending as a non-resident. But WISHE also helps states cooperate in other ways. We exchange information among the states on important higher education issues. So we have a fairly extensive research and policy analysis program, and we are always trying to identify new needs in higher education that can be addressed through cooperative action. So the title of this program, that is cooperation between higher education in Mexico and the United States, is one such need that we feel exists that we're trying to address through discussion with educators both in the western United States and in Mexico.
So, Fernando, turning to you, are there agreements now for education between the two countries, or what is happening in this particular area?
I think we're on the cusp of a new stage of development in the educational relations between Mexico and the United States. WICHE is an organization whose principles of cooperation, whose record of trying to build access and serve communities is an organization that I think will play a pivotal role in taking us successfully to the new stage of development. Historically, of course, between Mexico and the United States, across 2,000 miles of border between the two countries, we've had long-standing and deep ties. There are many Hispanics, Mexican origin people in the western region of the United States. The Spaniards, Mexicans explored, settled the Southwest, parts of the West. We see that in the names of rivers, of towns, cities, regions, of states. When I say stages, I mean this. Individuals have gone back and forth studying, earning degrees, having foreign study experience in both our countries. We've gone in the last 5-10 years to a second stage of programs of interchange, of collaboration between academic departments, research centers, policy groups. But now we're on the verge of a new stage, and it's inspired by a new vision. It's a vision of North America that is evolving in Canada, in the United States, and in Mexico. It's got a very practical side. Trade, which has always been big, Canada and Mexico are the United States' best customers, is expanding. Between Mexico and the United States, it's tripled. And so as the economic relationship expands, we are recognizing ways in which we can cooperate in higher education for common purposes. What's a common purpose? One common purpose one is to become better prepared in the United States, our young people, young men and women, to work and live in an international economy and to live in a North American economy. So we are on the verge, I think, of new agreements, breakthroughs that will take us to a higher level of cooperation than before.
My first question is also directed at Fernando. We introduced you as the co-director of the USMexico Project on Higher Education, and you certainly have done an excellent job of articulating some of the things that are already in place. Could we give you the same invitation we gave Dick about his organization? Could you tell us what are some of the very specific programs that you have in place now, or future plans that you have to escalate this cooperation between the institutions in Mexico and the United States in the area of higher education?
Well, the project that we are organizing and initiating through WICHE with Mexican colleagues and Mexican higher education institutions is going to take a hard look. Colleagues, business and professional leaders, civic leaders on both sides of the border are going to work together to take a hard look at the present state and the future of our higher education institutions, the role that they have, the value that they have for economic and social development, the changes and the needs that we have for change in our institutions to fulfill our goals and to meet state and regional needs that we have for economic growth, for social development, for environmental protection. We're going to work together on these broad themes, but we're going to get down to some very specific projects and programs that we hope to initiate and expect to initiate. And these are going to be characterized as by as they're going to be collaborative efforts, partnership efforts, and we see a benefit to both countries in what we're going to do. It's going to strengthen our respective capacities to offer our students, our faculty, and communities international education that will prepare them to be productive as possible in the kind of economy we live today and that is emerging in North America and in the world.
Tony, if I could add a word or two to that, this is a project that is emerging, and in fact the reason that we're here is that Lee Vickers, the president of Lewis Clark State College, who is also the chairman of my commission, the WICHE Commission, Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, invited us in the context of the International Exchange Conference being held now at Lewis Clark State College, as you know, invited us to convene a group of people from the Western states, the WICHE Commission, as well as several experts on higher education from Mexico to talk about possibilities. So our commission has enthusiastically endorsed this project at its annual meeting back in July, but we are just beginning to think through the elements of it.
Dick, may I pursue that a little bit further with you? I hear you saying that there's a lot of planning going on, a lot of discussion. Do you anticipate in the future, in a very specific way, I'm thinking of examples such as student exchanges where students will be attending under some program like the which he has had among the states across these international borders. And if I can follow up on that, also would business and others be involved in consulting with how we can expand this program to where students will be dealing with specific programs that they will use in both countries?
Yes, the actual student exchange could occur, but probably down the road. More immediately, our plan is to put together a series of what we're calling task forces on various issues in higher education that are of concern both in Mexico and in the United States. And one thing that you mentioned, that is partnerships, effective partnerships with business, is obviously one such concern because of the growing, as Fernando has discussed, the growing trade between Mexico and the United States and the new impetus to that will be given by the North American Free Trade Agreement. So we expect one area of concern to be how higher education and business and elementary secondary education can work more effectively together to meet educational needs in the context of that will address the needs of this rapidly global society that we're in. A second area of work is in examining how telecommunications might be used, the sort of thing that you're doing right here, how that might be used to affect some exchanges between the United States and Mexico. One of the things that we discussed today was that our curriculum, that colleges and universities are looking at how they might strengthen the international aspects of their curriculum. Wouldn't it be great if we could help them do this through programs that were broadcast from Mexico City and made available to colleges and universities in the United States, as well as programs that were broadcast in the United States and made available to, let's say, teachers in Mexico to help give them access to new methods in teaching. So those are two of the areas, and there were a couple of others that Fernando might want to mention, but those are two of the areas where we thought that there were some real opportunities for collaboration, and we'll be trying to explore those opportunities in the coming months.
One final question to Fernando that came out of your comments, Dick, and that is that I visually see from your comments that we can create an invisible border, that is, that as far as exchanging of research information and ideas, and there could be a rapid growth in data collection and understanding by this kind of cooperation. Is that part of the plan, to share that research information?
Yes, I think that we have a recent author called it the disappearing border. I think when it comes to trade of goods, services, ideas, information, that we do have a disappearing border. Mexico is one of our 3 best customers in the world. 70% of Mexico's imports come from the United States. Goods, services. I think a young man or woman in higher education today, in preparing for a job or a profession, will benefit from having a study stay in Mexico, learning about Mexican society, culture, institutions, organizations, and in returning to the United States, that knowledge will be a benefit in the economic and social relationship that operates between our 2 countries. And this applies to Canada. Canada is also one of our best customers. And so we have emerging, it's already in place, it exists, it's a reality, it's going to become bigger, North American free trade environment. And 360 million consumers, the largest market in the world. And American companies, producers of goods and services, will have access now to the world's single largest market.
Janelle Berg.
Dick, beginning with you, have you done any studies to determine how many students currently are crossing over the borders, either between Canada and our western states or between Mexico and our western states?
No, we haven't done that, Janelle. We several of our states actually are trying to collect that data, and we're trying to put some of those studies together, but they're looking at what exchange agreements do exist, and indeed many of our colleges and universities in the western states have already initiated some kind of specific exchanges involving their students or their faculty members. But I can't give you, there are a number of such exchanges in existence, but I can't give you numbers of students who take advantage of them.
I do know that students cross over borders. At the present time, when they cross borders, what is their status?
Well, when they cross borders this way, they're treated as non-resident students, so they're charged that higher level of tuition that I mentioned earlier, and that's true of Canadians coming to the States. Though I know that Washington and I believe Montana and I think Idaho may have some such arrangements that some of the students that come down from Canada are treated as resident tuition, as resident students on a reciprocal basis with the Canadian provinces. We have been talking to higher education ministers in the western provinces of Canada to see if we can explore much the same sort of collaborative relationships with Canada that we're trying to initiate with Mexico as well. The idea of non-resident tuition isn't as important to Canadians, because all Canadians moving among provinces are all treated for tuition purposes as residents of the province that they're being educated in. So the idea of reciprocally waiving a non-resident tuition is not as attractive to the Canadian provinces as it is to the U.S. states.
Now, in terms of how those systems mesh together, what happens? In other words, are they on the same kind of 4-year plan that we're on for an average college student?
I believe that's true in Canada, and Fernando is the expert on Mexican higher education, and I will defer to him on
Okay,
Mexico.
let's move over to Mexico.
It varies depending on the professional field. It can be 4 years or 5 years to complete the curriculum for a degree in law or in business administration, another year in medicine. We have a flow of students from the United States to Mexico. For the most part, it's a flow of students who go down to learn Spanish. Some go down in organized programs of foreign study, still called foreign study, and where they learn about literature, the culture, sometimes history. We don't really have too many structured opportunities, programs linked to academic departments, study programs that are part of our regular curriculum in our colleges and universities in the Western region that provide study opportunities to students. By that I mean study opportunities that are linked to their degree requirements, their major requirements, their study programs. We're going to see more of that, and students will be able to complete a portion of their studies in Mexico, and they will come back to the United States with a knowledge that will be very valuable to them in their subsequent professional careers.
I would say that, just as a comment, that it would seem to me like in many cases it might be advisable for a student to spend a portion of time, but not in their entire degree program in Mexico, but perhaps to spend a semester or a year there getting acquainted with the culture.
Exactly.
That would give them the kind of diversity that they would want. But now I have a question for you, just to follow up, and that is, how do we overcome the language barrier?
Well, it is important to emphasize language learning in the United States, in Spanish, in other world languages. Most programs, study programs in Mexico, feature a language training component, and students will frequently go in the summer and spend 3 or 4 weeks, sometimes up to 6 weeks, taking intensive language training and then beginning a program of study. Sometimes the language training operates concurrently with a study program, but there would have to be advanced preparation, and that would ordinarily be carried out, completed on a home campus.
My next question is directed to Dick, and it has to do with what is going on in higher education in other parts of the United States as it might relate to both Mexico and Canada. Dick, are there other organizations, such as the role that WICHE is playing in the West, that is addressing these same questions that we have on the program today?
There are other organizations that are similar to WICHE in structure around the country. In fact, in each of there are 4 regions of the country that are involved in, whose states are involved in a similar, we call them interstate compacts as WICHEs. There is the Southern Regional Education Board encompasses 16 southern states. There's a New England Board of Higher Education with 6 New England states, and there is a recently established similar organization in the Midwest, the Midwest Commission on Higher Education. WICHE is particularly situated very strategically in terms of relationships, potential relationships with other countries, or strengthening relationships with higher education in other countries, because most of our states, Idaho included, share a border with Canada or Mexico. And if you talk about the Pacific Rim, then of our 15 member states, 10 of them have what I would call international borders. So the western region of the United States, I think, is particularly suited to take advantage of the new commercial relationships that are going to be occurring through the North American Free Trade Agreement, and WICHE would like to play a role in helping higher education to strategically position itself in relation to those to that kind of new to those new economic opportunities as well.
I might also add, Dick, you've been around as an organization, I understand, next year 40 years, and so there's some maturity that's come about during that time, and doesn't that give you also some additional both expertise and resources to expand into these areas?
We think that's true. WICHE will be 40 years old next year, so we think that Governor Andrus and his colleagues in the other western states have an organization that serves them very well in terms of helping them cooperate with one another, and this has proven itself valuable over a long period of time.
And one final question to you, Dick. On last week's program, we had a guest that was very informative about the new American trade agreement with Mexico, and we also spent a lot of time on the program talking about the agreement with Canada that will be finalized in a final form in 1998. From those two agreements and this very vast opportunity to expand trade, can you give us one or two very specific ways in which higher education will be most impacted by those agreements?
Well, I think the ones that are the ones that we've already mentioned. One is a great need for the curriculum to be more alive to international education opportunities, and in areas such as strengthening the study of foreign languages that Fernando was talking about a few minutes ago. So clearly that, quote, internationalization of or strengthening the international aspect of both the curriculum and the total program, and I think Lewis Clark State College does that very well through this international exchange conference that they hold annually. And then it would seem to me, too, that other possibilities that we haven't discussed would involve collaborative research among higher education across national borders, because as we know, research is a strong contributor to the economy, and we would strengthen our international aspect of the economy by forging some linkages, some of which obviously already are in place, but strengthening linkages between universities in Mexico, Canada, and the United States in terms of the kinds of collaborative research that they may be doing.
Fernando, I have a final question for you, and that has to do with all the work that you're doing and Dick is doing and others. You certainly are out in the on the cutting edge of this whole process. Is there something in particular you'd like to recommend that we're not doing that you think would be most helpful?
I think that the main thing is to recognize that we have to learn more about our neighbors to the north and the south. We have to give that more importance. There are humanistic reasons for that, there are historical reasons for that, social reasons for it, but there's also a very practical purpose, and we need to, if we're going to have a revitalized American economy and a revitalized economy in the Western region, we've got to look to business opportunities, to trade.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I've got the signal we're out of time. On behalf of Janelle Burke and our staff, we thank both of you gentlemen for taking time. You were most cooperative and informative, and again, I hope your
thanks very much to
has
you.
been good. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this 3-week series, and we again thank Lewis Clark State College for their great cooperation on their 12th annual international conference to provide these guests over the 3 weeks. I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week when we will discuss what we also believe to be an important issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.